Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Ní, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator, and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Today I am delighted to welcome Marc Haine to Life Beyond the Numbers. Marc, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I'm delighted you accepted my return match request. I had the privilege of being on Marc Haine Live not so long ago, and I will post a link to that in the show notes. It was a lot of fun as well as giving a lot of value. Thank you for that opportunity, Marc.
And thank you for being such a brilliant expert on my show. Hopefully I can return the favor.
You will. You definitely will. I can feel it. And I'm so excited about all of this because when I see what you do and read about you and having spent time with you, I'm even more inspired by your approach. And I absolutely love what you ask people to imagine, which is imagine a world in which the majority of us put more love and care in being of service, where people dare to be the exception. Every day.
Goosebumps, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, why isn't that the world's motto?
Well, it's interesting because I really came up with that because I was trying to figure out what is the difference between mediocrity and excellence. My background has been in hospitality, and culinary arts was a big part of my development and so on. And I always kind of thought, what's the difference between putting out a good meal and a great meal? And really, at the end of the day, I tease people and I say, for everything that we do, if you cared this much, like just a couple of centimeters of care, it would make all the difference in the world. And so that's how that phrasing came out, to dare to be the exception every day by caring just a little bit, just care a little bit more. Look at a transaction and say, how can I put more love and care into what I'm doing?
Do we learn not to? Where does it all go wrong?
I think that we get so carried away by our environment that we forget what we're here to do. I used to joke in hospitality, if it wasn't for all the people, this job would be so easy. But the bottom line is that as service providers, and you could be an optometrist giving service, you could be a dentist giving service, you could be in a restaurant giving service. We do the work every single day, day in, day out. We have our strengths and our weaknesses. We have our highs and our lows and our energy levels and so on. And we react to our customers within those flows. One of the things I used to do with my serving staff, because we also in hotels did banquets, and every time we did a banquet, we had to make absolutely sure we were bang on. It had to be 100%. I mean, you could not go to a bride whose wedding you just messed up and say, oh, I'm terribly sorry that didn't go well. Can we give you a 25% coupon for the next time? You just can't, right? And so I used that kind of focus of putting on that production. And I would tell my serving staff in the restaurant, see each of these people at these tables, each one of them has their own event. We don't know if this is the first time that they're meeting. We don't know if this is a repeat, a second date. Maybe it's a business meeting, but everybody's here with their own mini event. And if we can treat it like that, then whenever we walk into the dining room, we can think, I want to make this event great for them. And so it takes a lot of intentionality. But where it goes wrong is that we get complacent. We just get into the same flow over and over again, and it's same repetitive stuff. And then we stop caring and we stop going into this is my job mode.
Just treat every day like a banquet. Every customer in front of you, you can make their day or break it. And
Mm-hmm.
it reminds me of a very recent trip to an electronics store here, which is a frustrating event at the best of times. I didn't order on Amazon, and I purchased earpods, that was it. And they were marked down on the sticker. So I
Yep.
went up to the cash register and they had the original price, not the new price. So I explained that they were marked down. I had to take the lady down, show her where, bring her back up, and she had to get somebody to change that on the system. 9 minutes later, I was still standing at the register waiting for the person, the manager, whoever, to come. And when he did, he didn't look at me. He didn't say, I'm sorry, it's taken me this long. He didn't say one word, except the feeling I got was I was in the way. I was being awkward and difficult. And I was just thinking, like, how easy would it have been to just give me eye contact and say, it's all sorted for you now, or anything, even acknowledge my presence. And I'm amazed how we don't treat people like people.
Well, and again, you said what's wrong. Here's a guy who's in his little bubble of his day, and he's not opening up his awareness and his intentionality. And so this is what's scary about this is the leader. This is the floor manager or the department manager. And if he acts that way, how can he insist on high quality of service from his staff if he doesn't do it? Taking that a step further, what would have made that magical would have been if he not only acknowledged, oh, I'm terribly sorry that we mucked up the price. I'm terribly sorry. We'll get this fixed for you. Oh, by the way, we have a pricing code of conduct. Because we made the mistake, we give you an additional 10 pounds off or whatever, right? $10 off. Being able to kind of interact with people like you're putting on a show has been the catalyst of my background now. And this is what I talk on forever, because it's all about this idea. And you said you read the first bit of my book. My first chapter is called Experience Expectations. And that's all about understanding what are the touch points in our businesses and how can we look at the touch points and make them extraordinary rather than just the day-to-day transaction.
I grew up where I was always told, expect not, and you shall not be disappointed.
Oh, that is so sad.
I don't think it was meant to be that sad. But but I do think it's funny. Our expectations are generally quite low, perhaps, in a lot of our one-on-one interactions in a supermarket or in a train station or in an electronics store. Perhaps different when we're sitting having a meal or on a plane. We have different expectations, but I think they're easily met if there's some intentionality, like you're saying.
Yep, and all we have to do is just care. Just care, like on an airplane, just care that people are on a plane. It's a routine that most of us don't do very often. So why can't we make that extraordinary? I just found a post on Instagram on the Orlando airport. During the heat wave, there were people in the airport giving out free ice cream. Now, when we think about airports, we're thinking, oh my goodness, I was just at LAX. Oh, it's a terrible airport. Oh, Toronto, Pearson International Airport. Oh my goodness, if I could stay away from Pearson, that would be great, right? We have all these different pictures in our heads about what airports we like to go to and which ones we want to avoid like the plague. But here you have Orlando airports, just because it was a heat wave. I don't know what it cost them. Maybe it's 50 cents per person, but there was somebody handing out ice cream. And so now you have a group of people, travelers inside the airport, all of a sudden getting surprised by this little token that is so minuscule and yet made such a big impact.
It's so true, isn't it? And what you were saying about avoiding places like the plague, it's not the place,
No,
it's
nope,
the experience that we
exactly.
had. And it's the people often, unfortunately,
Mm.
that have created that experience.
Yeah.
And we remember, as like you have the Maya Angelou quote in your book, and so do I, we remember how people make us feel.
Yes, absolutely. 100% of the time, 100% of the time. And you might not even remember people's names. You might not even remember the whole context of the experience. You just remember, when I went to this one particular thing, I had a great time. Or when I went here, it was terrible. And my wife is always calling me back and saying, "Oh no, we went to that restaurant 10 years ago. Do you remember how long we had to wait?" "Oh, I don't want to go back." "That was 10 years ago." But that's how ingrained these memories be within our psyche, to make sure that we don't hurt like that again.
Do we say anything? I think it's different depending on the side of the ocean, perhaps, that we're on, because certainly here we're not very proactive at saying this service sucks. We don't have to be that, we don't have to attack either, but
Yeah,
because we're not used to standing up for ourselves or being a little bit more demanding of something
yeah,
basic, we tend then to have an outburst
yes.
rather than, and again, then that's messing with everything, isn't it?
Well, I do have a theory, because I'm Canadian, so we're polite about everything. And so when somebody says, "How is everything?" we say, "It's fine." And then something magical happens when we get into our car and drive home. I think there is a time distance correlation between the time we leave and the time we get home, because when we open up our laptop, all of a sudden we turn into the Incredible Hulk on a keyboard.
Yeah, and he certainly wouldn't like you when you're angry. Not you, but any of
Exactly.
us. Yeah.
Exactly. Don't make me angry. It's true, though. A lot of us don't say things. And we learned not to say things because the result, typically, it's not humble response. It's not insightful responses. It's usually excuses, right? So you say to the store manager of the electronics store, and right away it's like, "Oh, well, I'm really sorry about that. But, Steve has been really busy, and he's been just fighting off a crisis because something didn't get shipped that was supposed to get shipped for a special order. And it just came at a really bad time. I'm really sorry." That doesn't do it. That doesn't do it at all.
It really doesn't, does it? The excuses are, I think we just want the truth. I go to this coffee shop every now and then, and I was in there one day and there was a queue. It wasn't huge, it's a small little place. And the guy served somebody, and then he looked at me and he said, "I've got two more people, and then you're next." I think he was maybe doing takeaways as well, and they weren't their orders. And then he did his one more and he said, "Just one now." And he kept me informed the whole time. And afterwards, when he was serving me, I just said, "Look, thanks so much. That was really helpful. You managed my expectations." Instead of saying, like, "Oh, another copy," he just did the whole thing really, really well. And he said to me, he was young, he was like in his 20s. He just said, "I feel it's really important to keep people up informed of where they are and what's going on." And I'm like, yeah. And I will go back there. Now, he's not there anymore. And sometimes the service is a little bit hit and miss, but mostly they're really, really lovely in there.
Interestingly, though, what was your response every time he said, "Oh, I just have two more transactions and then I'm all yours"? What was your response to him? Was it that you were pissed off and mad, or did you go, "Oh, no problem"?
No problem. And I never appeared annoyed in the first place. So he, even
Right?
before I had a chance to be annoyed at waiting, he's already letting me know, "You've probably got a 3-minute wait," or whatever it is. And it
Yeah.
just makes all the difference. We never mind once
Yep.
we're informed. None of us like being kept in the dark.
Yeah. And it was just such an easy part of the transaction, is just to make that little memo to your waiting clients. "Hey, I just got two more and I'm all yours. Hey, I'm down to one. I'll be right with you." Right. And being able to do that just puts out whatever fire of angst or frustration might be seething in the embers.
That you've possibly brought with you from a different situation altogether, but this coffee guy is going to get it in the neck. And
Yeah.
And isn't it the same in our workplaces as colleagues as well, Mark? That we care for one another.
The big difference, I think, is going from transactional to relational. We have to stop thinking in the way of, okay, I've got this customer, I'm going to serve this customer, now that's done. Next, I have a colleague, he wants something, he's standing in my doorway, okay, as soon as I'm done this, I can get on to my next thing. That's not the way that we interact as human beings naturally. Nature doesn't work that way. And so this idea of getting into conflicts, and we really could do another podcast on how to respond to negative online reviews, by the way, because there's a formula in what I teach that you can use, whether it's with a colleague or whether it's at the electronics store, where you apologize for how the person is feeling. I'm sorry we made you feel this way. I'm sorry, I can understand. And then you tell them how much you understand about it. And then you have the whole focus. What is your focus as an operation, or what is your culture as an operation? And so even when you're going head to head against a colleague, being able to say, oh, I'm so sorry that, I can absolutely understand how frustrating that is for you. I didn't fill up the photocopier with all the pages. I'm terribly sorry. I will make an absolute commitment that we will make sure that the photocopier stays stocked, whatever the issue is, right? And being able to do that and apologize for your role in maybe how they feel, even though you might have not done anything wrong. It's how they feel. You can't control how other people are going to feel. But because we're in a relationship, we could turn around and say, Susan, I'm so sorry that I made you feel that way. I can see how frustrating that is for you. We'll make absolutely sure that in the future, this will not happen again. Right? And if it's a team interaction, you could turn around and say, I'd really love to get together and figure out how we can keep this from happening again. A manufacturing operation that has a janitorial service. The mop bucket is always dirty. Okay, well, let's get together and let's figure out what the process should be to make sure that the mop bucket is never going to be dirty in between shifts or between uses or whatever. What do we need to do? What's the process? And then once you bring everybody in, again, using it as a relationship building and saying, we respect each other, we respect each other's comments and each other's ideas. Let's brainstorm on what we could do to make this better. Let's answer any objections or any challenges we might see in that brainstorming session. Let's come up with a way that would work for everybody.
And like what you're saying there is not rocket science. In fact, it is simple. It's basic. Is that why we overlook it?
It's because, again, we're transactional. We get into the grind and we forget to care.
Okay, you're going to keep telling me this, aren't you?
I am, because ultimately that's what it boils down to. It's that intentionality. We've always seen when we felt that somebody cared about what was happening to us, it always made us perk up and take notice. Like when somebody does an act of kindness, you don't forget that. But at the same token, when somebody does something incivil or cruel, you won't forget that either. The protagonist will, like the aggressor will, forget about it. Like, I forget that you came in and it's like, oh my goodness, are you wearing that to work? And you're like, I took time to pick this out. It's a seagull moment where they come in, they poop on everything, they squawk and fly away. And they don't even remember.
Well, one of the things that I do in some of the trainings, leadership development, is ask people to think about a leader in their life who had an impact on them, like a positive impact. And everybody around the table will sit and take a few minutes, and then all the stories will be a version of the same story. And the leader might be anyone from a former boss, a parent, a teacher, whatever, but it'll be about how much they cared for them and went out of their way to do something and all of that. And you can see people go, oh, so I can be like that? And you kind of go, well, isn't that what you remember? Why wouldn't you want to be remembered like that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's just back to basic humanity.
Yeah. I had a colleague who is one of the best inquisitive, curious people I've ever met. And she always asked really great questions. And so instead of taking things at face value, she would ask really good questions. And so it helped do a couple of things. Number one, it helped me as the receiver of that to start thinking about what I was saying. And so one of the things I tell people when dealing with difficult people, they say something cruel or incivil, one of the things is I ask them to repeat, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And then they would repeat it. And then I would say, why would you say something like that? And all of a sudden, it's amazing to see how people who are incivil, who have something rude to say, will start to back out and they'll start to justify why they said it that way. And it's interesting because you really steal the power from the incivil person who is there to either dominate a conversation, validate their existence, that they know more than you, they're better than you, whatever. And that's a them problem. It's not a you problem. And you get them to start thinking about how they're responding. And so I firmly believe that what gets rewarded and recognized gets repeated. So if you catch somebody with a negative behavior, you're not necessarily rewarding it, you're calling it out, but that's a good way to keep it from being repeated without judging them. I'm sorry, what did you say? Huh, that's interesting. Why would you say something like that?
Or one of my ones is, tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting. Can you tell me more?
It can be easy to disarm people or get them to think. And I suppose we live in a world of our own making, and a lot of the time we're just obsessed with ourselves and we forget to be civil.
Road rage is a perfect example of that, right? It's like something happens, somebody cuts you off, and right away it's like, I have to get on the horn, I have to flip them the finger, I have to curse at them. It's like, but you don't stop to understand what their situation is. I have a perfect example. I drove into West Edmonton Mall. West Edmonton Mall used to be the biggest mall in the world for ages. Now it's not. They were installing new rides in the amusement park. And so there was all these metal girders and everything all lined up. And as I drove in, I saw a small red pickup truck back out of this parking spot. And the way he was going, I could see that because all these metal girders were lower than his bumper, he probably didn't know he was about to bash into it. So I honked. And so he slams on the brake. He looks at me like with a face of fury, gives me the finger and peels out. And I thought, isn't that funny? Because the only thing I was concerned about was I didn't want him to bash up his truck.
He filled in the blanks and just jumps to this massive assumption. This guy's an asshole, and I'm gonna show him.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know what? It probably tainted the next half hour, next hour of his day.
Or maybe,
right? You get yourself all riled up, and we don't stop to understand. Now, would I say I'm perfect? No, I'm not perfect, but I try to understand that maybe the person who just cut me off, maybe they're in a rush. And I tease my wife. I said, oh, obviously where he's going is more important than where I'm going. Right? But my wife is like, you should honk at him. And it's like, why? What will it solve? What will it solve?
Exactly. And it's not that you're going to be a pushover in life and let people walk over you. It's just that we don't really ever know, do we? The stopping to understand, I roared with laughter with one of your stories in your book. And it was about an interview you had to be a manager.
Yes.
So maybe you would tell us that story.
Yeah. So I tried for a job, and after I met with HR, the CEO wanted to meet with me. And so I sat in his office, and he proceeded to interview me. But his interview was more like an onboarding process. It's like, so Mark, we have a really good culture here. Hard work is really rewarded, and we honor trust and trustworthiness. You're trustworthy, aren't you? And it's like, yes, sir, I am. And then he went on this diatribe for like 15 minutes telling me about everything that they did and everything. And at the very end of it, he punctuated it. And all I had to do was do this the whole time. And then he got to and so, Mark, do you think you'd be a good fit for this? Absolutely, sir. And then the interview was over. If I said 10 words, 15 words, that's all I said during this whole interview over a period of like 45 minutes. Right? And then I got hired. And then like a few months later, I was talking to the HR manager, and she says, oh, Mark, he was really impressed with you. I said, really? Oh yeah, he was blown away by your values and it's like, isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating because the guy just did not stop to understand anything about you.
No, no. Maybe they were desperate for somebody to work there. Maybe they were really focused on, I really need to get the right people in there. And so it became all about him. And it became less about me or how I could serve or what my needs were and so on. And it became transactional. Oh, you mean I have to interview somebody? Okay, give me 5 minutes and then send them in. Right? And then it's him putting on his little hat of rah, whatever. Well, I have to tell you, that particular business certified to become unionized. And it's certified to become unionized because one of the things that he said was, and this was years ago, this was like 10 years earlier. And this is how good memory is. About 10 years earlier, he had said something to, well, if you don't like it, employees like you are a dime a dozen.
Oof.
Right? And so when it came time when people started talking about kind of their work environment and all this, and somebody approached them about certifying in a union, that was the big thing that they kept bringing up time and time and time again, because this is what your COO thinks about you. And it really reminds me of like today's political situations, right? Like I know that even in Great Britain, it seems like we're devolving into incivility in our interactions. I'm seeing it a little bit here in Canada, but the influence of that is the whole Trump regime, the Trump methodology of leading is starting to dominate. It's like, because Trump now is doing it, it's almost like it's giving us permission to be incivil to one another. And I'm seeing it in Canadian political system as well, that there's more name calling now than there was. I did see a snippet in Great Britain in Parliament that people were yelling at each other and treating each other with a level of disrespect I really hadn't seen. There used to be decorum. And somehow we're losing that. And I think that's a shame, because even when you have the mores of decorum that says this is how we're going to act, even though you might be mad, at least by having the standard that we're just going to act like this and then we'll deal with the rest later, means that we don't have to be incivil to people and we don't have to crush them in order to get what we want.
I think that COVID contributed to that as well, because we were all locked up for so long that when we came out again, it was almost like we had to be trained in how to interact with people. We had lost some of our basic manners, not all of us, but I can see that in people. And it has spread into the political side. And it's not just decorum, is it? It's diplomacy.
Yeah.
And we're meant to be able to have disagreements with one another without this either or extreme perspective. And that's why I love what you talk about with improv, this yes and.
Yeah, for those people who don't know anything about improv, theater, improvisation, if you ever watched Whose Line Is It Anywhere, that's the improv. And the whole big overlying philosophy, and I think it was Tina Fey who kind of figured this out, was this aspect of yes and, which means you take what you're given as a gift, an idea, a thought, a proposal. You take it as a gift. And instead of saying, no, but we don't have the budget for it, you say yes and you don't have to vocally say yes and. You just look at it and say, okay, what's my yes and going to be to this? I'm accepting it. And okay, so I'm going to accept it. Thank you very much for this proposal. Have you thought about the budgetary constraints? Because that's the yes and. Yes. And what are we going to do about budgetary constraints? And then they feed that, and you take that as a yes and. And I personally think that every time somebody says no but, it takes the idea and it shuts it down. And if you ever listen to anybody who will turn around or they'll say yes but, anytime they use the word but, they are shutting down the idea, right? So you say, I have this great proposal. And they go, yeah, but and then that negative comes. We don't have the budget. We don't have the staff. It's going to take too much training. And so it's all the excuses of why we can't do something. And so my response has always been, are you saying no because it's impossible? And they typically will say, well, it's not impossible. And I said, so if it's not impossible, what will it take? And it changes the whole conversation.
It really does.
So accepting that, and I've worked in different environments where employees are treated like peons. I truly believe that we surround ourselves with people. Like when you hired these people, you hired them because they were the best that you could find. So why not treat them like that? Because I believe that everybody comes to the fold with their own superpower, their own ideas. They have their own experiences. So why can't we tap into that? Yes, they're not the director of operations, but you know what? If I go to this person and I say, so tell me something about this, and get their perception, maybe you'll get insights that you didn't even know existed because you don't have those same insights or same experiences.
And it's not even maybe, is it? You are going to at least get something. And maybe not the first time, because they might be like shocked.
The first time is going to be like,
what?
Is he testing me? Yeah. Am I going to say something out of turn and then get slammed for it afterwards?
Exactly. But creating the environment where you take everyone's perspective into account, it just
it's
changes.
So important.
Yeah,
I think
so
in the book
important.
as well, I talked about this one environment where I was doing a SWOT analysis. And as part of the exercise in the hotel, I talked to all the leaders first, and then I started talking to the employees. And the owner came back from vacation, and he says, what's this thing you're doing? You're doing like a swatting or swatting? And so I told him what it was and what the intent behind a SWOT analysis is. And for those who don't know, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within a business. And so I was sitting down with employees and trying to get their perception of it. And he looked at me, he goes, what can a dishwasher tell me about my business? And I said, well, you don't think that he's got some insights into what he does every day? I mean, this guy's standing at a dish pit, washing dishes 8 hours a day. He knows where bottlenecks are happening. He knows what products are working and what doesn't work. He knows the hiccups that he's facing in order to do his job effectively, I believe. He looks at me and he goes, the only thing a dishwasher could tell me is what time is his smoke break and when does he get paid? And I thought, okay, well, I'm done. Because that's that mindset that limits us to forever be micromanagers, to forever be the heroes of our own story. And then you are also that person who will turn around years from now going, I don't know why nobody takes initiative. I don't know why I always have to tell people what to do.
I wonder how the person got like that in the first place. I don't spend too much time, but it's also a bit sad because they've probably had people who've treated them in a certain way that's how they then turn up themselves.
Or they got let down. They had an expectation that was unfulfilled. And because of that, I don't know I can trust you. Right? So that happens. And again, being able to turn around and say to yourself, why do I feel this way about that? I walked into a middle managers meeting and they had like a middle managers lounge, and I walked in there with my cup of tea. And then the manager was telling the supervisor, oh, this girl, Donna, she's such an idiot. I don't know why we hired her. I had to stop right then and there. I had to stop the whole thing. I said, I need to interject. If you are saying that Donna is stupid, how do you expect the middle manager to treat her when he goes out there? Right? And so somewhere along the way, we must be very, very cautious of how we see people, because it's easy to pass judgment. It's easy to say somebody's an idiot because they made a mistake or whatever. But we have to understand that when we communicate this within our management team, and people, oh, it's behind closed doors, it means nothing. But you can't tell me that it doesn't affect when people step through that threshold. You can't tell me it doesn't taint their view of what goes on, especially if it's a domineering manager telling somebody this. It's like, how do I get into his good books so I don't become the one that he's going to chastise behind closed doors?
Yeah. It's
exactly what you're talking about. It's this getting beyond the numbers and thinking about the relationships that we're building. It's not about profit and loss in these conditions. Anything we've talked about today has not been about profit and loss.
Well, it has indirectly.
Absolutely.
That's the result.
Because we know that when trust is low, I think it was Stephen Covey's son, Stephen Covey. who said that when trust is low, costs go high, right? Time goes high. It takes longer to do things. Look at 9/11 when we all of a sudden had to go through security checkouts. Now it takes much longer to get through security checkouts than it ever did before. Why? Because trust is low. So the cost is high now. It takes more manpower to process it, takes more time to process it. And when you don't trust, you're going to be putting all sorts of things in. COVID was a perfect example. What happened the first month of the lockdowns when people had to work from home? You had all these businesses going out and buying surveillance software for the laptops because I want to see that, make sure everybody's doing their work. And the surveillance software, because it generates tons and tons of data that nobody has time to go through, it's kind of like putting up a surveillance camera. It's great that it's there, but you never have time to watch the footage.
Unless there's a crime committed. And
Unless there's a crime. Unless there's a crime, yeah.
But trust, you talk about cultures and subcultures as well, Mark, within an organization. And I've seen a lot of that myself. And I think it's phenomenal how in a really, really awful organization that you can have teams that are just high performing because they all trust one another and they get along.
Yes. And it's not just the leader, but it's the moral leadership within the team as well that helps contribute to that. And so that is something that I don't think a leader can really control. If you have a toxic work environment as a whole, it gets harder and harder to do this. But then you end up with these kind of renegades of, I don't want to let this get to me. Do you agree that maybe our department, that we should just, let's just perform at our highest level and see what happens? Right? And then people turn around in the rest of the organization. The unfortunate part of it is, and I've worked in a municipal government where this was the case, where the catalyst was all of a sudden people in other departments were pointing fingers at this high performing team because, oh, how come they get away with this? And they're always meeting, and how come they're doing, and I wonder what kind of work they're doing. And it becomes this whole big kind of backstabbing kind of, like, it becomes this toxic thing of they have something special, so let's poop all over it. Why can't they just be like us? And it's like, yeah, but you have high turnover. You always have people who are angry at work. People aren't happy. They're not smiling.
They're disgruntled.
They're disgruntled and disengaged.
And they don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Well, neither do they. Neither does that person who's complaining. Yeah,
I'm just here to do my job. That's it. Right. And to me, that's poison in an industry. That's poison in any business. I'm just here to do my job. I'm here, I show up, I do my job, I go home. At the very beginning, we talked about this aspect of caring. How can you care if that is not the culture? If you don't have a leader that cares about you, or a middle manager that cares about you as a frontline worker, how are you going to care about your customers? You can fake it for a little while, but when crisis hits, we will always default to what the corporate culture is all about. Ask any server who went into the kitchen to cry after a customer gave them heck, or a boss or a manager gave them heck, and they're in the back room crying because of the way that they were treated. And I can tell you, anybody watching this, I'm sure knows somebody who was in the industry. Oh, I know that happened to Jane.
Oh, yeah. And it happens in every industry.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
It does. And it doesn't have to. And it doesn't have to. All we have to do is just care this much.
I know. And it's like, was it Roosevelt who said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yes.
It's so easy. And we're natural caregivers. Yep. You see two kids playing together. Okay, they might have a little fight, but then they'll be putting bandages on or whatever. They'll care for each other, and it's in us. Let it out.
Yep. But I think, again, through our schooling processes, we get all this shaken out of ourselves. One of the things I tell people is, as adults, we stop telling people that our feelings got hurt. If you think about most of the angst, most of the kind of conflict that we have, somebody's feelings got hurt, and we don't talk about it anymore. We talk about it in grade school. You go home and it's like, oh, little Stevie hit me. Well, you tell Stevie he hurt your feelings. And so Stevie hurt my feelings. And then he pummels you because you're being such a wuss. And then you learn to stop saying that. But the fact of the matter is, when people get into conflict, it's because somebody's feelings got hurt. I feel disrespected. I feel that they didn't give me due course or due respect for something. It's always falls down to somebody's feelings got hurt, and now I need to exert myself to either dominate back, hit back, or I need to withdraw and cry in a corner someplace.
And that's why my book is about how accounting for emotions tips the balance at work.
And it really does.
It really
read the
does.
book. If you haven't read the book, read the book.
So one more thing about your book before we wrap up.
I should hold it up.
Absolutely. Well, I actually don't show the video. So Marc's book is Lights, Camera, Action. And I'll invite you to tell us a little bit more about it in a moment. But the thing, here I go with my butt. The thing about improv, one sentence just jumped off the page, and that sentence from you was, innovation is born through improvisation.
Yes.
I love it.
We've never invented anything knowing what the outcome is going to be. We have an objective to it, but what it gives us is it gives us the curiosity to say, what happens if we do? Right? Without being curious and being intentionally curious, you can't innovate. You can't look at something and say, how can we fix this? Unless you're looking at something going, we've been doing this for like 20 years. Technology's changed, culture's changed, generations changed. Is there anything that we should change here? And by asking that question, all of a sudden magical things come up. You no longer have people going, well, we do it because that's the way we were trained and that's the way we have to do it this way, right? And so we get innovation by saying to people, yes, and tell me more, give me more information. Okay, let's explore it. Let's break it down. Let's break it out. Let's get to the idea and say, what is it we're trying to achieve? Somebody might come to you with an idea and you go, let's take the yes, and I really like, okay, I understand. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Because sometimes the idea coming to you might be a Band-Aid to a problem, but now you're in a communication, which is the key to any relationship. And now you're having that communication and you're being able to share ideas. And from there, you come to an understanding, you get clarity, and from there, you can become more innovative.
I used to work somewhere where we were told to be innovative, almost like, almost ordered under fear.
Didn't you get the memo?
It was kind of like that. And it was the worst atmosphere. And it shut everything down. You cannot be curious if you're stressed.
Well, and you can't be curious if you're constantly being chastised for it. The minute somebody turns around and go, look, it's not your department, don't worry about it. We got another department for that. Or, you know what, just focus on what you need to do. Well, the minute you shut people down, they'll stay shut down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's so simple.
It seems like it, but everybody watching is nodding their head going, oh yeah, I remember a time. I remember that one person.
Well, I'd love to hear those stories. So if anyone has some great stories for Marc and I, be sure to send them our way.
Yes, please.
Marc, tell us a bit about what you do in the world and your wonderful book.
Thank you. So Lights, Camera, Action was actually born, as I mentioned, I spent many years in hospitality, and it was one of those industries I thought all the people problems we had was endemic to hospitality until I worked for a municipality doing a service excellence program. And I got to work with other businesses and realizing, oh, wait a second, the problem is human beings, not the business. From there, in 2016, I started to act. And so I had my colleague came and knocked on my door. And she says, Marc, you act, right? And I said, well, sometimes I act silly, sometimes goofy, but most times just immature. And she goes, no, like on a stage. And it's like, oh, I've never thought of it. She goes, we're doing this play and you make her really great for this one particular character. And it's like, oh, I've never acted before. I've always secretly wanted to, but I'm so afraid that I can't remember what I had for breakfast. How am I going to remember lines? But I went ahead and did it. And I have to tell you, after 3.5 months of rehearsals, I don't care how funny the play is, nothing is funny anymore. And in 3.5 months going into a 4-month rehearsal, and you think, why are we doing this? The stress. I have to remember all these lines. And this is why did I do this to this sucks. This is terrible. Why are we doing this? And I have to tell you, opening night, I'm standing behind the door backstage. Now I have to step onto stage. This is first time ever acting. The lights dim down in the whole auditorium. My hand is on the doorknob. I'm waiting for the music cue to step out. The music cue comes, the lights go on, and I step out onto the stage. I can't see anything because you're blinded by all this light. And I utter my first few words, and then I hear laughter from a room full of 250 to 300 people. And it sent chills up because at that moment, even though I was in the middle of a scene, at that moment I realized this is why we're doing it. And it was such a profound moment for me that the next day I came in 2 hours early from the call time, and I walked into the venue and I went to the lighting board and I turned on the stage lights. And that was the first time I got to see what the audience saw, which was all of a sudden this setting that gave a time, a place, almost a situation, because it was French kind of resort area. And I thought, that is absolutely magical. I turned on the lights. I went up on the stage. I sat on the couch and looked at everything that we created. Coordinating volunteers, coordinating caterers, setting up the dinner theater, building up the stage, building out the stage, all had to be done. The rehearsals, the coordination of every aspect of the experience for our customers, for our audience. And I thought to myself, if businesses put that much time, attention, and focus into their business that we did to put on 6 shows, we'd have amazing businesses. And that was a catalyst for Lights, Camera, Action. So I took the whole idea of putting on a live theater play and I said, what happens if I put business into this lens? What would happen? And so what happens is I wrote this book, 20 chapters. Most of them are hilarious because when you read them, number one, you've experienced it in some form or fashion yourself. At least I hope so. And we look at it from the business perspective, and it just shows how ridiculous some of our processes are when we think about what we do in our business. If you were putting a live show, for instance, a perfect example in hospitality, it's not unheard of that you'll apply for a serving job and they say, oh, good, you have 3 years experience serving. That's really great. Okay, here's the menu. Here's your apron. Here's your card for the point of sale system. That's your section over there. Go. Would be akin to, 10 years acting. Oh, wow. Shakespeare? Wow, that's so good. Wow, I can't wait to see your show. Okay, so here's your costume. Here's the script. You go on in 10. We would never do that. But yet in businesses, we do that just shadow him. Just shadow him for a shift, and then tomorrow you'll be on your own. It's like, what? That's not a rehearsal? And so it just goes to show that some of our processes and the way that we build our businesses, they lack something. So every chapter has a worksheet. So my hope with it, I wrote it specifically so that leaders, I believe that most leaders are incidental leaders. So that they've been promoted into a leadership role, but never trained to be leaders. And so my hope is that they read this. Number one, hopefully they giggle no end when they read it. But at the same token, there's a worksheet after every chapter. And my hope is that leaders can take this with their middle managers and their frontline managers, go through the book, read a chapter a week, work on the worksheets individually, and then come together once a week to compare notes. Because I have a sneaking suspicion if we do this, we're going to find different ways to be able to do something that really leads to a high level of operational excellence.
Wow. That's such a good idea. Such a good idea.
I hope so.
And I also think when you read Marc's book, it is as if Marc is talking to you. You get that sense that it's a conversational read, which just makes it all that more tangible and easier to digest and feel invited into the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that, Susan. Honestly, that is probably the best compliment I've received.
Oh,
thank you.
I care.
This much.
That much more than yesterday, Marc. Marc, it's been such a pleasure having you on Life Beyond the Numbers. And if people would like to connect with you, where do they find you?
Just Google Marc Haine and you'll find me. So it's Marc with a C. So it's spelled the French way, because my father is from Belgium and he taught us to be able to do the Fringlish like that. It's Marc, M-A-R-C, Haine, Haine.com. You can find me and my email is marc@marchaine.com. Super simple, but look for me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, online. I'm everywhere. Gosh darn it. I'm like your dirty socks. You always find them somewhere.
Our son. Well, no, maybe that's not the best analogy because it's not always out in this country. Rain.
Yeah,
We've
it's
always
pretty...
got rain.
There you go. Let your smile be your umbrella on a rainy day and you will be happily soaked.
Oh, and on that note, there's nothing else to say. Thank you so much, Marc.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Susan. It's been a joy.
Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.